I have realized that a big percentage of the T.REX audience are guys with military experience. Some of them are active now, some of them are out. This is an area where I don't have a lot of experience, and I would like to make sure that I have a better idea of how to talk to guys who are either about to make the transition into civilian life or have already done so. So we have talked in the past with some different folks. We've talked to Brandon, we've talked to Lance Corporal, a number of people that have got into this. Today we're going to talk to Jeremy Stalnecker. All right, welcome back to another T.REX Talk. Jeremy, welcome on to the show. We have not, so if this were a proper like television interview style program, I would have read both of your books. We would have had a lot of brainstorming time before this, but this is a podcast. This is a very low key, informal conversation. So why don't you introduce yourself to the third chair, the listeners?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to be on. And I was mentioning a minute ago, I love your content, and these are my people. So glad to be with you guys. I'll give you the short bio. I am currently the CEO of the Mighty Oaks Foundation. We are a nonprofit dedicated to serving veterans, active duty service members, first responders, and their family, many of whom are dealing with trauma because of life. We've been around for a while, and early on it was all combat trauma, but now it's kind of the myriad of traumas. And we work to help folks move beyond that. I served in the United States Marine Corps. I was an infantry officer, served in a number of capacities. My last deployment was to Iraq in 2003 as part of the initial push into Iraq. Made our way to Baghdad, April 10th. The Battle of Baghdad was the last fight that I was involved in. Retrograded back, came home, and transitioned into civilian life. I was in ministry for a while, Christian ministry, church ministry for a while. And then in 2012, started doing the work that we're doing with the Mighty Oaks Foundation. So yeah, it's been an interesting, I think, seat, because I lived through transition and really struggled through transition for a while. But then so much of what we try to help folks with is transition as well. So yeah, really appreciate this conversation. It's so important.
Yeah. So what is the biggest lesson, or maybe I should phrase it a different way? What is it that Mighty Oaks does best? What is the thing that you have? Because I've talked to a number of guys who have focused on this issue or have gone through this. What is your what's your strongest? What do you bring to the table that is your, either, if we were just purely talking business, I'd say your key differentiator. But what is your strongest strength in this area?
I think what makes us unique and different is we are a faith-based organization. And so we approach these issues of trauma and transition and all of these issues from a different perspective, perhaps, than many people do. And what I mean when I say that we are a faith-based organization, I mean, that means very specific things to people. The way that we address all of this, whether it's you're dealing with trauma in your past or you're trying to navigate your way through transition, trying to find out who you are, these questions, when we approach it from a faith perspective, we start off with the premise that God created us. If he created us, then there's purpose and design. If there's purpose and design, then there is something that we should be living for or toward. So regardless of what's in your past, good, bad, or otherwise, you can continue to move forward because there is a purpose for the life that you've been called to live. And so, specific to transition, so often when we hang up the uniform for the last time, it's as if we put our entire identity. And if our identity is in the closet with that uniform, our purpose is also there. So we come away from that and go, all right, well, who am I? And if I don't know who I am, then what am I supposed to do? And that leads to so many downstream issues. But we approach that from the perspective of, look, God has a purpose for you and a plan for you that transcends a job that you do. And so it's unique in that sense. And again, there's a lot of great helps, a lot of great therapies, a lot of great, even organizations, but we approach it from kind of a foundation up perspective.
Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar with the Sebastian Junger book Tribe and possibly War, where he talks about the difficulties with this issue. And I feel like that's the piece that he's missing, is the faith piece. And he has some fascinating observations in the book. At this point, they've probably been discussed on every podcast under the
Sure.
sun multiple times. Uh, but he misses the faith piece. He touches on it, but in a purely kind of circumstantial way. Like he talks about
Yeah.
World War II vets coming back and plugging back into their communities,
Mm.
and he talks about their social network of Lions Club, Rotary
Yeah.
Club, church,
Yeah.
etc. Um, in a very kind of mechanical way, and he talks about, um, yeah, just the difference that the modern American soldier is in when he no longer has that community plugged back into. But he is kind of missing that the faith piece, that there can
Yeah.
be. There's more to the church than just a clump of people.
That's right. Yeah, and a lot of people when they talk about, what you need to be resilient, right? Even the Department of Defense recognizes there are some things that you have to have in your life as a holistic person in order to be resilient. Resilience is having the ability to get knocked down and get back up, right? Very, very simple, oversimplified definition. But if you're resilient, then you can get knocked down and bounce back up. And the Department of Defense and others have recognized these pillars. So you need to be mentally strong. There are ways that we can do that. Physically strong, uh, eh, strong in your social connections. This is how we're talking about it now. Is you need to have great social connections, right? And then there is a faith piece or a faith pillar. And so if you have those four pillars, body, mind, social, and faith or spiritual, then you will be resilient. You'll be able to bounce back when life is hard, when difficult things happen to you. But the challenge is if you almost secularize faith, which is what a lot of people do, then you
Yeah.
take out God and you take out the spiritual real component. You say that, well, faith is something that connects to who you uniquely are, your unique personality and makeup and all those things, which I don't disagree with. But again, it misses the God part, right? And the
Hmm.
reason some would say, if you secularize it, that faith is important is because you're connected to a like-minded group of people, exactly as you described it. Faith is essential because it puts you in a group or a community of people that are like-minded, that can support you, and that can give you some degree of value. But again, if
Hmm.
you take God away from that, that is important. Those things are important. Even studies or research around faith and its impact on post-traumatic stress will say, well, it doesn't matter what faith, just the fact that you have faith is important. Well, sure, because community connections and relationships, even an understanding of a higher power, something outside of myself, that's important. But fundamentally, if we take away God, then what we're taking away is unique design. And again, if you follow that all the way down, then you're taking away purpose. You're taking away ultimately hope of
Hmm.
anything outside of my lived experience.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to leave faith behind, but I do want to talk about the social component for a while.
Yeah.
Even if we did take faith off the table,
Yep. Yep.
if it was
Yep.
thought experiment, it doesn't matter,
Sure.
and just the social component, that is something that is radically different now than even when I was a kid. Like I knew guys when I was young who had gotten out of the military right before Operation Desert Storm or right after, and their experience was drastically different than guys that are getting out now.
Mm,
The social framework or the social landscape of the United States is so different now with the internet and social media and things like
mm.
that. Um, you can have thousands of friends on Facebook or Instagram
Right.
without
Right.
having
Right.
actual social connections. And so even just thinking back 20 years ago, um, before GWAT kicked off, guys were getting out of the military, and even if they weren't plugging back into 1950s Americana, they were still plugging back into a social network that
Yeah.
was it had more thread to it than what we have now. Is that another thing that you're seeing addressing?
Yeah. I mean, isolation is the most dangerous aspect
Mm,
of a lot of veterans in particular. And I would say this is true of law enforcement and those in the fire service. We're seeing this a lot. Isolation will absolutely destroy you. Really interesting study. I think it was NBC that did the study. Don't quote me on that, but but there was a study done in 2021 and it looked at suicide rates in the active duty community. So suicide rates in the active duty community have held at approximately one a day, every day, 365 days a year in the active duty community. That's terrible. However, just looking at it from a math perspective, when you consider, more than 2 million service members around the world and the various family backgrounds and those kind of things, the fact that it's held for, decades is interesting.
Mm.
2021, going back to March of 2020, so this is why the study was done, when service members were now forced into isolation. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, maybe you are, but during the pandemic, there were so many
Interesting. Yeah.
things, so many interesting, restrictions put on the military. Things like if you reported for Marine Corps boot camp, you were put in a hotel room to isolate for 2 weeks before you were put into the general population of boot camp and you could start your actual 12 weeks. So
Interesting.
now boot camp became 14 weeks, right? Isolating people for periods so that they could deal with COVID. All of these restrictions were put on people. So this study was done about the active duty suicide rate. The Department of Defense recorded and reported that the active duty suicide rate went up 25% across the Department of Defense during that period from March
Wow.
of 2020 until the study was done, I think a year later, maybe June of 2021. Um, we're now looking at active duty suicide rates at over 4 a day. So simple, anecdotal, but isolation absolutely will destroy you because the struggles that you're having had in isolation, you have no one to set you straight, to verbalize that with, to work through that with, and so you make other bad decisions. So, yeah, just connecting to social networks. Um, eh, you know, um, I'm a big fan of Go Ruck and rucking. Well, why is it that veterans kind of get involved in things like that, in groups that go out and do these things? Sometimes it's the hard stuff. But most often, it's because of the social connections. You could look at run clubs or gun clubs or whatever. People
Hmm.
that want to get involved in these social activities, and we're made to be social. God created us that way, and
Yeah.
to not acknowledge that is I would say is dangerous and deadly. People take their lives because they find themselves alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are, this is another fascinating thing. I think that part of the reason that guys that have gotten out of the military are in a particularly difficult situation is they have actually had community. I know a lot of guys younger than I am who are kind of struggling, but they didn't lose community. They never had it.
Mhm.
And I do wonder if being in the military, having community,
Yeah,
having these relationships with your unit, having a shared mission, depending on each other,
yeah,
being together,
yeah.
all of these things which are are not unique to the military. If you look
Sure,
historically,
sure.
these are normal requirements for human
Right,
survival
right, right.
a lot of times in history. But nowadays, in modern American culture, those are pretty unique to the military. So there are guys, I think, that having experienced these kind of relationships and this kind of strong community and dependency and mission focus and all of these things,
Mm.
um, it's so much harder to lose that than if you never knew that that was even a thing. That's
Yeah,
my
and
theory.
yeah, and the bonds of the military, even outside of combat, there's so much hardship that is shared and so much, as you mentioned, mission focus. You're working together with other people, you're around other people all of the time. And when that's taken away, it's like the bottom's falling out. My life, I served in the Marine Corps, I was in combat, and I was, tied to, married to, bonded to that unit that I was a part of. Came home 30 days later, I was out of the Marine Corps working out a church. So if you said, where is the best possible place to land for community and support and all those things, you'd probably say, go work at a church. I left that Marine Corps brotherhood, the Marine Corps community, and I'm working on a church staff. And that's when the bottom fell out of my life. I mean, frustration leading to anger, putting my wife in a place where she had to decide if she was willing to stay with me, almost losing my job. All of that stuff in what we would consider to be a safe environment because I lost that brotherhood and
Yeah.
those connections. So to your point, you're exactly right.
Yeah. Now, so this is an issue. Let's get back to the faith component. Let's get back to the church.
Right.
I have on this very podcast several times, and will continue to have some pretty critical things to say about the American evangelical church in
Mm,
general. There are amazing exceptions, but in general, the American church has kind of followed the American general cultural trend. So connections have been less important.
yeah.
Community has been less important. Church is so much easier now. Like there are fewer commitments to being in a church
Yeah.
if you go to a generic American church.
Yeah.
It is really possible to go to a mega church with thousands of people in it, and
Mhm.
nobody notices if you don't show up. You
That's
know,
right. Yeah.
you can never see the same person twice in a mega church for a good long time.
Yeah.
Um, it is possible to check the boxes and not actually do the thing, not actually do the one anothering,
Mm,
and have those kind of accountability structures and taking care of one another structures
yeah.
that the community really relies upon. So um, that is another thing that is I think leaves our communities in a very weak spot when it comes to bringing guys back out of the military and plugging them back into things. If we've let our churches languish on the vine, and then we tell our guys to plug back into bad churches, like it's not actually going to help as much.
Yeah. I mean, all churches are not created the same, right? And
Right.
um,
Different communities are going to have different needs, and
that's
the
right.
church is yeah the church is there for the flock. So the shepherd is gonna shepherd the flock based on their needs. It is going to be very different across the board for sure.
And that should be the case. But it's interesting talking to pastors. So I served on that church staff for 5 years, and then I pastored a church. I was a senior pastor of a church for another 7 years. So I've been very involved in church life, and yet I still share your criticism of a lot of churches, right?
Mm,
Um,
yeah,
and particularly what we call mega churches. I think they bring a lot of good, but there are
yeah.
also some things that are missed along the way. And it's
It's
interesting
great
talk.
when a mega church has the resources to do projects that little communities
Exactly right.
couldn't do. Yeah,
Exactly
yeah.
right, and sometimes they will, but I spend a lot of time talking to pastors who will say something like this to me, "We don't know how to serve veterans in our church community.
Mm,
We don't know what to do with them, we don't know how to respond to them." I have pastors that will call me and say, "Hey, I've got this veteran in my church, and he's struggling, and I don't know how to counsel him." And one of the interesting, I guess, is the best word. I don't know what the right word is, but one of the things I struggle with when I get those calls is, all right, if a young lady who's in your church was raped, or there's a drug addict who's in your congregation, or there's a marriage issue between two people who are in your congregation, or whatever, go down the list, right? You wouldn't say there's nothing we can do to help them. You would help them to the
right.
extent that you can. You would then find other resources that can, if you can't deal specifically with their issue. But there's something about veterans in the United States, and I think particularly a lot of the conversation around post-traumatic stress disorder and all of these other kind of cultural conversations that are being had that have caused a lot of pastors to step back and say, "We can't help them because I wasn't in the military," or something like that. Which
Mm,
really, if you know how to, maybe I'm getting on a soapbox a little bit, but if you know how to take a Bible and you know how to apply the truth of Scripture to the myriad issues that humans have, then you have the ability to help anyone who's hurting from anywhere. Now, you may need to
yes.
have some help to open a conversation. I get all of that, but to disqualify yourself as a pastor and disqualify the church that you lead from being able to help someone that is in need is, to me, is tragic. And so we're trying to do more to help pastors understand, no, you do
Mm,
have the resources you need, but yeah, you can't just say, "Hey, you're coming back from wherever. You need to get plugged into a church." You need to find a church that understands and can care for you.
yeah. Now, one of the things that might be daunting, I agree 100%. Scripture is perfect for these things. But one of the things that is potentially daunting, uh, I am not in church leadership, but let's say I was in church leadership. I was an elder, little country church, 100 people. Um, Guy shows up and he's, say, a lieutenant colonel. So he has led men into combat in
Yep.
larger groups than our entire church.
Yep.
I would feel very inadequate
Yep.
to be talking to this guy about leadership and other topics. Like, but as a pastor, the pastor having the responsibility to lead the flock, having the word, all these things can work through other things. But I can definitely imagine feeling daunted, like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I'm leading this church, but this is a guy who takes battalions into combat.
Yeah.
That's a
Well, I mean, I think if you're doing it right, there will always be people who are more qualified to lead to whatever than you. And let's take the military thing out, and it's a business leader. It's you run a company, and Isaac, you show up at my church, and I could try to project that I know more about running a business and doing these things than you do, but that's number one. It's somewhat hypocritical, but it's not helpful either. My responsibility is to take
yeah.
the word of God and to apply that to the life, the culture, the world that we live in, and the individual situations of the people in our church. And so, I get that, and I agree with you on that. I think that is our kind of initial response: is, well, I'm not qualified to help them. But what we
Mm,
have to understand is, if they've come to us, God has brought them to us, and they're willing to listen, then we don't have to try to pretend like we know what it's like to be them. We just have to use the word to minister
yeah.
truth to their situation.
Yeah. Now, on the topic of leadership, you've written about leadership.
Yeah.
Um, so I saw a terrible meme the other day,
Great, great.
and I mean, it's okay to share this with you because you're a Marine, so you have. I'm probably a little more sympathetic to the Navy than you are, but there's a
Oh,
Navy
boy.
guy who was like, "Oh yeah, the military taught me all about leadership, but the only lesson I really remember is if somebody doesn't listen to you, you just throw them in the brig." So,
That is, yeah,
and
military leadership. Big discussion. Yes, yes.
so there are fascinating, incredibly applicable, universally human leadership principles that I think the military is great at instilling,
Yeah,
and then there are entirely process driven and force
right.
based chain of command leadership stuff that also gets
Yeah.
ingrained.
Yes. Yeah, so you mentioned I wrote a book on leadership, and I did. It's called Leadership by Design. And the reason I wrote the book wasn't to write a leadership book. There are some great leadership books. It was because it was a while, probably 10 years after leaving the Marine Corps, I was really struggling to get my brain around what leadership actually is. So I came out of the Marine Corps environment. I went to officer candidate school. I went to the basic officer course. These are schools that every Marine officer goes to. And then I went to infantry officer course. And then I led in a Marine infantry battalion. I didn't lead the battalion, but I was one of the officers in the battalion. I led Marines in combat. So I understood that type of leadership, that super type A, aggressive leadership. Um, it really is jump on the table, follow me. The loudest guy is the one who is the leader. He's the guy in the room, right? And that's an immature way of looking at it, but that's what I took away from that. It's just, hard charge all the time and people will follow you. Then I came into ministry world, and there's this concept called servant leadership or spiritual
Yeah.
leadership. And I read some books on that, and my reading and my understanding of what those authors was saying was this. So take this for what it's worth. This is just me. I was a Marine, right? I'm not super educated. What I took from those books on servant leadership was that it was just manipulation, but with God attached to it. So if you can somehow
Got
frame
it.
what you want people to do in the context of God also wants them to do this, well, that's spiritual leadership or servant leadership. But it was the same thing. It was, I'm trying to
Yeah.
get you to do what I want you to do. But instead of being the loudest guy in the room or screaming about it or, throwing you in the brig because you wouldn't do it, I'm going to tell you what I want you to do and then explain how it's God that really wants you to do it. Now that's an
Yeah.
overly cynical look at that. But I looked at these two things and I thought, man, leadership has got to be in the middle somewhere, right? It can't be one
Yeah.
or the other. It can't be based on a style or based on a particular leadership environment. There has to be something that is fundamentally leadership. And that's why I set out to write the book. And I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but I came up with a definition that works for me. So here's how I think of leadership. Leadership is fundamentally leadership is taking people from where they are to where they need to be. That's what a leader does. A leader recognizes where the people in his world are, the people that he can influence. He understands where they need to be, or at least the direction they need to go. And he uses his time, his talents, his resources. He stewards over what God has given to him to help the people that he leads go from where they are to where they actually need to be. Now, you need to take that definition
Mm,
and apply it in your circumstance or situation. There are certainly,
yeah.
as we would say in the Marine Corps, tactics, techniques, and procedures to help you get there. But fundamentally, leadership has nothing to do with the leader. It's not about the leader getting what he wants from the people that he leads.
Yes. Yeah.
It's about helping them collectively accomplish what needs to be done. And then you can talk about how to apply that in a family situation, a business situation, a
Right.
military
Yeah.
situation, a church situation. It applies. And so that writing that book was an exercise for me. And then stepping back and saying, what is leadership in the Bible? What does that look like? Well, it looks like God the
Yeah.
Son, who is the creator of the universe, humbling himself for the benefit of his creation. Man, that's
Yeah.
leadership. And so, that was the journey that I went on for really to help me try
Mm,
to understand that better.
yeah. Yeah. And I do think that it is really helpful to boil leadership down a little bit. I have read a number, excuse me, I've read a number of business leadership books over the
Yeah.
last 5 or 6 years primarily. And they have been a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Some of them have
Yeah.
been accidentally helpful, where I'm like, oh, this is
Accidentally, yeah.
so terrible that
Yeah.
now I understand better the book that I couldn't tell if it was good or bad. There's
Right.
been a little bit of that, and then there's been some stuff that's been great. But yeah, I the fact that leadership is going to, for those of you listening to the podcast, leadership is a responsibility that you have regardless of your station in life currently, or whether you are leading a battalion or whether you are leading a
Yeah.
church.
Yeah.
um there are people around you who are being led by you in a direction, and maybe it's obvious, maybe it's your kids. Like, I was just thinking, I have a number of small children at home, and the leadership responsibilities that I have to them are very obvious because I'm the dad.
Yeah.
And then there's leadership that I have inside of T.REX, which is a little bit less obvious. Like, it has really crept up. Like, it started out
Mm.
very simple. Like, we just make holsters together, and
Right.
I am in charge of CNC manufactured holsters. So making sure that the people that are making those have the tools that they need is a really obvious thing.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't leadership at first. It was just like, I
Yeah.
run the tools and they make the things and we make sure
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
works and we're a team and it just kind of happens. Well, now there's 90 people at T.REX. So it's
Yeah.
just kind of
Yeah.
happened. And that's why I started reading the leadership books. But yeah, it is fascinating to, read spiritual leadership books, husband leadership books, business leadership books. And I've actually read a number of military historical leadership books from a completely different perspective for a
Mm.
completely different reason. And in a lot of ways, I would say that good leadership is where they all intersect and actually work together.
Yeah.
And then areas where they're spread apart and like, this is only for your employees
Yeah.
who you can fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
This technique is only for people that you're allowed to
Right.
throw in the brig. You're like, oh, well, that may not be real
Yeah.
leadership then.
Yeah, and I think, this is always that weird conversation about the difference between leadership and management, right? I mean, and there is a difference.
Mhm.
They're not in competition. Management is, it's you've got the tools, you're helping the people that need the tools, right? That's management. You're moving
Yeah.
people and places from one place to another. Leadership, I think, demands that the person being led wants to be led. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. Yes.
Management happens, I think, when leadership is no longer possible. If I can lead
Hmm.
you, that is me using the resources, opportunities, whatever I have, influence to help you get from where you are to where you need to be. And in a manufacturing context. Maybe that's to help you have what you need to accomplish what we need to accomplish. Maybe it's there's a growth opportunity that I can help plug you into. Whatever that is. But you say, no, I'm not going to do it. No, I'm not going to listen. No, I'm not going. Okay, well now I need to manage you because you're an
Hmm.
employee,
Yeah.
and so I will make sure that you clock in when you need to clock in, and you do the thing, and then
Yeah.
but everyone benefits when real leadership is at play, the people
Yes.
leading and the
Yeah.
people being led. And so there's an interesting conversation there. But, and then again, for sure, how you lead in different environments is different from one place to another. I would never suggest that that's not the case. But I think one of the
Yeah.
consistent things you see, whether it's in battlefield leadership or corporate leadership, good leaders, beloved leaders, successful leaders, so often are people that they kind of lead from the heart almost. It's I just want what's best for
Hmm.
you,
Yeah.
and I'm willing to set myself aside to make that happen.
Yeah. And going back to military history, like really beloved military leaders
Yeah.
had that heart, and their men understood that
Yeah.
of them. And I do appreciate the difference between leadership and management. Like management is like, I got to make sure that this guy has what he needs
Yeah.
to make 100 holsters a day,
Right.
because that's just the standard, and like he's got
That's
to
right.
meet that standard, and if he runs out of raw materials he can't do it, so I'm managing his raw material availability so that he can do the make the widgets.
Right. Right.
um yeah, and having a leadership heart that goes beyond the widgets, to the deeper, to the longer mission, to the bigger mission,
Yeah.
um is I think a really useful differentiator. Mm.
I think too, you'll see longevity from employees and the people that you lead when it's more than just managing, because
Yeah.
eventually everyone realizes that management is about all of us getting paid. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's not that's why we have jobs, is to get paid.
Hmm. Yeah.
But someone who leads, they care more about me than just what I can produce and what the bottom line is. And the weird thing is the bottom line is always better when the people want to be there. And so it really
Yeah.
does serve the overall mission as well. Yeah.
Yeah. If people self-manage, then their managers get to do other stuff,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
hopefully it's bring more value to the
Yeah,
company in a way that benefits the people working in the company or the
that's right.
customer. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting thing. But the corporate world has tried so hard to fix these things and solve these problems through
Yeah,
procedures and
yeah,
tips and tricks and things. And it's really easy to do that. I think that we are really blessed at T.REX because we have a pretty clearly stated mission. It's not obvious how best to accomplish it, but we have a mission that does go
right.
beyond the bottom line.
Yeah,
And if all we were was a widget maker, I think it would be really hard to rally around
yeah, yeah,
anything other than just like hitting targets. And we would set kind of arbitrary KPIs that tie
yeah,
directly to the bottom line, or employee attendance, or
yeah,
downtime or error rate. Like those are all important. We do track those things here, but those things are in service of something else. If those things were
right.
ends unto themselves, I think it'd be pretty miserable. I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. I think, and that's
Yeah.
true everywhere. I mean, you think about in the military sense, some of the crazy things, Marines, soldiers, sailors will do for the people that lead them. Some of the
Hmm.
stories you read in combat are like, why would they do that? Well, because, the person leading, the person on point, whoever that is, typically a small unit leader, they were leading out in front. They were taking care of them. They were doing, all the things to make sure that the people they led had everything they need, even in some very, very bad situations. And there was a response to that. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, again, I think we see that in the corporate sense as well. And we hear about leaders who just they lead in air quotes by either manipulation or bullying or whatever,
Right.
and people
Yeah.
get out as quick as they possibly can, or they need a lot of money to stay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's guys who are probably hybrids of that. Like, I think Elon Musk is all three of those things. Like, if you
Yeah,
work for Elon
sure.
Musk, you will be poorly treated. This has been much commented on by
Right.
people who used to work for him. You will be extremely well paid, and you will be given a big, hairy, audacious like mission that people will
Yeah,
rally around.
yeah.
Like he appears to provide the whole gamut.
Right. Well, and
um,
I think, I think a lot of his I don't know him obviously, but you see a guy like that and you think, "Why does he treat people the way he does?" He doesn't need more money, so it's not that. It's that he's so
right.
passionate about what he does, and he cares so
Hmm.
deeply that it comes out in sometimes probably a toxic
Yeah.
way, but I do think that's different than someone who, they want to move the financial margin by 5% or something. That's not him.
Yeah.
This guy just cares so deeply about what he's doing, and if you're on his team, you better care just as deeply. Um,
Yeah.
but people do, and they're loyal.
Yeah. And in a combat situation, like the way that he treats people would probably save lives. I forget.
100%. That's
Yeah,
exactly right.
it's just very awkward to do that in corporate America, where it's like you can't make people do this stuff, and it's like, well, if we were all going to
Yeah,
die if we didn't make it up the hill, then we would
right.
save lives by doing it this way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or in the federal government,
the
right? And this is why people have a hard time.
yeah, the training, when you're in training, people's lives come first and you stop the training exercise when there's danger. But when it's combat, the mission comes first.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, I have very mixed feelings about Elon Musk because he's a very mixed
yeah,
bag of person anyway. But I feel like I don't know what he would be like in combat or running a war, but he does seem to run his companies in sort of a combat mentality where like we
yeah,
will take casualties in order to accomplish the mission,
yeah,
and that's just fine because the mission is
yeah.
that important to me. So,
Sure, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, he doesn't care. Um, yeah, different for sure, and when I think about leadership is taking people from where they are to where they need to be, sometimes the people you're leading can't see where they need to be or don't understand the
Right.
price that
Yeah.
needs to be paid to get them there. I think of, like, little
My
kids, right?
children
I've
are
got
in that category right now.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've got 4 kids, mine are older, but I think about when they were little and they needed to brush their teeth. That's what they needed to do. And they needed to learn how to, bathe themselves, and they needed to learn how to dress themselves, and they needed to go to school, and they needed to do all that stuff. Why? Because I wanted them to become well-adjusted, productive adults in a society and a culture
Hmm.
that isn't super kind. So I had to do hard things for them and with them to get them to where they needed to be. And that's a big part of it too. This isn't about, always doing what is perceived as kind or soft or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
In fact, often it's the exact opposite of that. And it's being
Mm.
strong enough and focused enough on serving the people that you're leading that you're willing to walk that hard stuff out with them. And kids are a
Hmm.
great example
Yeah.
of that. If you're doing it right, there's going to be some really hard days.
Yeah. No, if my wife and I changed our parenting style or goals to be, maximum happiness in the moment, that would be
Right.
terrible parenting.
Yeah, not
And I think
good.
that
Not
that's
good
part of the
parenting.
reason that the evangelical church in America recently has gotten so squishy is that
Yep.
happiness in the moment has been a much higher metric to pursue than that actual servant leadership. And
Yeah.
so it's created a lot of weaknesses
I
in
agree.
the
I
church.
agree. Yep.
Yeah, just like we would never want to put anyone on the spot in our church. And it's like, well, that limits the verses that you can
Yeah.
read from the pulpit,
You're
though.
right. Right. Just skip over the ones that will offend people. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
exactly right. And, this is that definition of love. You have to love people enough to do the hard things. I love my kids. I keep them from running
yeah,
out in the street, right? And good leaders understand, man, sometimes we're gonna have to do some really unpleasant stuff, but I care about you so much that I'm gonna walk this out with you, and it's gonna hurt, but we're
hmm,
going somewhere. This isn't just about
yeah,
hurting. We're going somewhere.
yeah. How exactly? I mean, how do you get into this with guys that you're working with? Because do people come to you for help to be led very directly? Like what's the procedure? How does it kind of
Yeah.
mechanically play out?
So we do a number of things. We speak in conferences and talk about resiliency and do those kind of things. We try to get in front of people before they deal with the traumas of military service or
Yeah.
whatever. So that's on the resiliency side. We're trying to help people be resilient. But our core program is what we call our legacy program. We have a 5 day, um, I'll use the word program one more time. 5 day program that we bring men or women to. They're separate programs, men's programs, women's programs. We have 5 locations across the country, and they're kind of ranch settings. So when they come, they're with us that entire 5 days. It's kind of isolated, but it's beautiful and comfortable. It's all of those things. But most of the folks who come to one of our programs or sessions are coming because they've tried just about everything else, but it's a trauma related to their work, maybe it's trauma related to life, but something has caused them to probably make a series of bad decisions, and most of the time, it's based on a loss of identity, a loss of purpose. I don't know who I am or where I'm going,
Mm,
or I've made a lot of bad decisions. I put myself in a very difficult situation. I don't know where to go from here. And so they come to us. Everyone who teaches in our program started as a student. So they came as a student, same way as everyone else. We brought them through a year-long leadership training process and program. So when they're standing in front of a class, they're not saying, "Here's what you should do." They're saying, "Let me tell you my story," and trying to communicate, "I know where you are because I've been there. I've experienced the same things or something similar to what you've experienced." So, military first responders, everyone who teaches, military first responder, we all have a similar background. We've all struggled in a similar way. And so I'm just trying to help you learn what I've learned to get me moving forward. And
mm,
then over that week, we start to put the pieces in place. We talk about faith. We talk about God. We talk about how to move toward the purpose for which He created us. We talk about what that looks like and what that means, but it's all from the testimonial perspective. So it's someone standing up saying, "When I came here, I didn't get this. Then I learned this about God or learned this about me or marriage or whatever," and started to put these pieces in place and was able to move forward. And so it tears down a lot of walls very quickly, and it just helps people to see themselves in what's being said, but understand there is hope, there is purpose, there is direction. I just need to make different decisions. We have the people there who can help them make those decisions. And then on the other side of that 5 day program, because it's not that long, we have a very robust aftercare program that helps plug people into counselors and churches and those other resources that they might need to
mm,
rebuild what has, so often been torn down.
yeah. So, one of the other questions I was going to ask you that I appreciate that you have covered. So, I was a volunteer firefighter for a pretty short amount of time. It was about a year before I got very busy with
Yeah.
being married and
Mhm.
T.REX and having kids. Um, and I definitely got better at this, but as I had a significant weakness, which was um, I would not exactly freeze, but when I would be on a call and I'd show up and it was better when I had something very specific to do, but specifically like say a traffic call where there's an accident and there's it's something that I've never seen before because I'm very green at this. Um, People who are really good at this talk about the world slowing down and they move quickly to get stuff done in a slow motion world around it. For me, it was the opposite.
Mm.
I would slow down and just be like, wow, I've never seen that much bone sticking out of somebody
Yeah,
before.
sure.
And then I realized like, oh, everyone's already on the scene and taking care of that. And I'm still standing here. Um, how do you, I don't know, how do you get better at that? How do you work at that? How do you be the kind of person? Because a lot of the T.REX folks, they're buying T.REX medical supplies, they're buying holsters, they're carrying firearms, they're wanting to be ready in that situation, that worst day of somebody's life situation, and be an actual asset and not a bystander who's just been standing for 2 minutes on the side of the road holding the thing that people are
Yeah,
waiting for at the bottom of the
yeah,
hill, going, huh?
yeah,
How do you not be that guy?
yeah. Well, we used to say this in the Marine Corps, they say this in law enforcement and in the fire service, is you always rise to the level of your training. And if you
Yeah.
have the stuff, right? You have the first aid kit, you have the concealed carry, permit, and you carry a gun everywhere you go, but you don't train to the point where I'm not thinking about these motions or these movements anymore. I've trained them so much that, my subconscious has stored them and I'll automatically move through them. If that's not you, then that's when you encounter a situation and you have to pause and think. Um, an interesting study from history, there's something called that we call the OODA loop. Maybe you're familiar with this,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
uh,
Hmm.
orient, observe, um, OODA, OODA, decide and act. Lots of different things.
Yeah.
Orient, observe, decide, and act. This was a tool that was used to teach fighter pilots. And when they get into a dogfight, they need to orient themselves on the target, on the other aircraft. They need to observe, see what's happening. They need to make a decision, and they need to act. And the teaching was you can win a dogfight if you can get in your competitors, the other pilots, OODA loop. You get in the middle of
Right.
that OODA loop, right? If you can interfere with one of those steps,
Yeah.
then you throw
If
him
you
off
can
his game.
force him to reorient, he will
He has to
never get
start
to
over
actually
again,
act. Yeah.
start over again, and then, yeah, he'll never be able to act. And that process gets faster and faster and faster and faster the more that you train.
Mhm.
Drawing a
Yeah.
weapon. Why do we draw and present over and over and over again without ever firing a round? Because at some point you're gonna have to pull the trigger on a live target, and you don't want to have to think about, where is my weapon? How do I
Mhm.
release it from the holster? How do I pull it? How do I present it? That process should be automatic because you've trained it so much. I think the first aid side is interesting, and it's a little bit different because it's harder to duplicate
Mhm.
real life. But
Yeah.
you have to train and train and train and train and train until it becomes second nature. Um, I think people that say the world slows down and all of that, those are people who are very trained, very adapted
Yeah.
to those environments. This is not their first call out or the first time they've done this. So there is a
Mhm.
point at which you have to trust that you've trained enough. I trust
Yeah.
that I've learned this. I know what I'm doing. I feel very uncomfortable and all those things, but I know what I'm doing, and you do it. You do the thing.
Yeah.
And then with repetitions come confidence, and with
Yeah.
confidence, hopefully comes that that flow state everyone's after, right? Um, there
Yeah.
is no easy way. It's just working really hard.
Yeah, and I will say I definitely got better. We're a super rural county, but Highway 40 runs right through the middle of our run area, so we did a lot. In
Yep.
fact, I we did way more, highway injury calls than big structure fire calls.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
got a lot more experience on that, and did get to the point where I don't even know what to call it, but it's kind of like first time you do something, you're terrible at it. But also
Yeah.
the first time you see something, your brain kind of like just hits pause for a second to
100%. This is not supposed to be
process
this
it.
way. That's what your brain says. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, I did not know that. Yeah. I did not know that that would, you could fit a car under there, but not the
Yeah.
people inside.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
there's a fascinating, I mean, I think that's another reason that, going back to servant leadership, you should do some servant serving really early on. I'm so glad that I had those experiences, and I wish I had done more of them. Um, but find opportunities where you can serve and you can get
Yep.
all of those first experiences.
Mhm.
Those
Yeah.
you can get those reps in. You can actually learn some stuff. You can have a better understanding, perspective, context for these things before you're in leadership. I'm so glad that we had some experienced guys on
Yeah.
those early call outs when I froze up, because I wasn't the guy. Now later on there
Yeah.
were some calls like where we responded private vehicle, and we were we were the ones, like my brothers and I were the ones on the call. There were no
Yeah.
experienced older
Yeah.
guys to show us stuff. So I would say the world is not in a great place. The odds that you will be
Mhm.
called upon to do some difficult leadership things in your life are extremely high. And getting some reps in serving other people will serve you really well.
Yeah.
That's my guess, based on, don't know the future, but that's my estimation here.
Yeah. I think, we talk about resiliency or being resilient. We often say
Mm,
that the key to resilience is pre-deciding. Don't wait until
yeah.
you find yourself in a bad situation to decide what you're going to do. And I think that's a big part of it too.
Yes.
Call it mindset, call it whatever you want, but it's making the decision. If I ever find myself in this situation, this is how I'm going to respond because you've already taken that part out then of the decision tree, right? Like,
Hmm.
I don't need to deal with this
Yeah.
now. I've already made that decision. And then I'm going to prepare myself to actually do what I've decided I'm going to do. And then when the situation arises, and I think it's interesting, you said when there are experienced people there, that's when you have a harder time. Well, it's true because you don't have to, right? But when there's no one else around and
Yeah.
you're the guy or the girl, I've already decided what I'm going to do. I'm trained. Now let me do the thing.
Yeah. So in the Marines, you had a number of experiences. I don't know all that they what they were, but I know enough Marines to know you've had some experiences. I can say that confidently.
Good, bad, and
Um,
otherwise.
what are some of those? What are some of the things that are really good takeaways? We already mentioned there's some chain of command,
Yeah.
fake leadership stuff that does not transfer to private life. Um, but what are some of those things that really did build your mindset, build your resiliency? What were some of the things that were really great assets? Because sometimes I talk to guys that have gotten out of the military and they don't have an understanding of what they actually bring to the table,
Mm,
um, in the civilian life. And some of them I think have been set up for failure because they've been told, leadership. You were a
yeah.
sergeant major, so
Right.
you're a
Right.
leader and you can go straight
Right.
into a corporate boardroom and you can tell some people what to do. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
unfortunately, they don't know how to listen to a sergeant major,
Yeah.
which is kind of their problem. But what are some of the things that were really valuable things that you're really grateful that you got?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was around some incredible leaders and I learned a lot from them.
Mm,
Once I started in my own mind to deconstruct leadership technique from leadership definition, I could see that more clearly. There are some men that I worked with and for that were just absolutely incredible leaders. And so I took that away and just having observed what that looks like in a very difficult situation.
mm,
Um, Leadership can be situational, and I don't think it's fair to tell military people, you know how to lead. Well, you know how to lead in that environment for sure, but let's take some time to figure out how to translate that. So, again, that can take some time, but I learned from some incredible leaders. Um, I think that people in the military learn structure, which is really important. I mean,
mm,
understanding how to operate within a structure or a framework is really important, particularly now in today's day and age where so few people seem to get that. So, observing good leaders, observing bad leaders, and learning from those as well. Um, Operating within a structure, learning how to do hard things. This is again something that a lot of people aren't accustomed to in this world because everything's about comfort and ease and that kind of thing. When you're in a job where you have to do the hard thing, in the infantry world of the Marine Corps, that could mean heat, it could mean cold, it could mean wet, it could mean, with the supplies you need, without the supplies you need, it can mean days at a time and nights at a time. It can mean a lot of different things, but understanding that the mission takes priority and whatever it means to accomplish the mission, that's what you're going to do. Again, I think that's a very, very valuable asset that you're bringing into the world. Learning how to work with different kinds of people. Man, the military is such a melting pot. And so you're with people from every background, every race, every creed, every whatever. And you learn that the mission is what keeps us moving forward together. And if we're going to accomplish that, we've got to put all this other silly stuff aside and figure out how to respect each other and how to work
mm,
together. And so I think people who have served in the military bring incredible value to whatever community they find themselves in or workplace they find themselves in. Um, but you have to be careful coming out of the military not to feel like you have to be that guy anymore. Take the lessons
mhm.
learned, realize you're in a new place, learn new things, and man, 6 months of learning new things and learning how to apply the old lessons, you're going to be unstoppable, and a lot of people really are.
Mhm. There's another thing as well that it's going to be valued differently by different people, but not only have you worked with different people within whatever branch you've been a part of, but you've probably gone to parts of the world that nobody else has seen, and you've seen kind of basic human behavior in a way
Mm.
that the rest of us haven't. So that is something that I think is really helpful. I know um, I have been to different parts of the third world for short amounts of time. It's very educational. Being stationed there, working directly
Mhm.
with the people, that's I'm sure that that teaches all kinds of fascinating things. But that's the kind of thing that you kind of have to learn how to apply. Like those are experiences
Right.
that are invaluable when you know how to connect them up to your new mission, your new purpose, your new AO, but may not necessarily be that valuable if you never think through them or apply them to anything.
Yeah, I think it makes you a well-rounded person, and for me, a lot of that is just understanding how big the world is. It makes a lot of the
Mm,
stuff that we deal with just seem kind of silly. Like, man, you don't have any
yeah,
idea what it's like in some of these places where food is not readily available and shelter, and the people are happy in spite of not having some of the things that we have, and there is incredible poverty in play. Yeah, just having a bigger view of the world, it can be very helpful. um, yeah, but again, you're right. You have to learn how to apply it in your new context, whatever that is.
yeah. Well, let's bring things back to what you mentioned before about the importance of faith, because that really needs to be the central thing that applies these some of these different experiences. You've seen good leadership, you've seen bad leadership, you've experienced hardship, you've seen people living under terrible conditions in other countries. You've seen the way that different cultural expressions play out here or there, and those can all be completely disconnected thoughts and snapshots and experiences. But if you are going to tie all those things together into one thing that has meaning or makes sense, it really depends upon you having a worldview that makes sense. That actually
Yeah,
there is a center to these things. There is
right.
there is meaning to them. There's a creator of the universe that can define these things for you, and they're not just random
Yep,
disconnected
yep.
stuff. So is that does that help people, uh, or is that sometimes just too much to grasp, or too big of an ask?
Too big of an ask to ask people to believe or to have faith?
Um, well, so asking people to have faith when God hasn't given them faith
Sure,
is too big of an ask.
sure.
But just telling people like you have been on the other side of the world, you've seen people blown to pieces, you've seen unimaginable acts of human cruelty. You come back here and you're in a corporate boardroom, or you see this happening here,
Yeah.
you see this happening there. All of these things have no seeming pattern or connection to them at all,
Mhm.
but there is actually
Yeah.
a way that they all make sense. Is that too big of a concept for folks sometimes?
I I I mean, maybe it takes people a while to work through that, and we have to be patient and gracious with people, just as God has been with us. I'll tell you,
Yeah.
there was a moment in time. I was standing on a road in Iraq. We were making our way to Baghdad. It was after a story that I tell often. Um, we'd been ambushed, and we went through this thing, and we got to the other side of it. I was a Christian. I had been raised in a Christian home. I was 25 years old. I had a wife and two little kids at home. But I remember after that event, for the first time in my life, really considering, I don't even know if I would have used this word, but the sovereignty of God. This reality that I can control what God has placed in my hands and given me control over, but I do the best I can with what God has given to me, but the rest of it is his. I'm not God. And the enemy doesn't care who I am. They don't doesn't care where I came from, or who my parents were, or what I look like, doesn't care. God is bigger, and I have to trust God. And it seems silly to say, like, that was the event that caused me to think that. I'd been raised in church, and I was a Christian, and I believed those things, but really crystallizing it for me. And so I think
Mm,
if you find yourself in a situation where you have to go, "Boy, there's a whole lot here that I don't have control over," because we all want control. I have to
yeah.
trust God. And when things happen that I can't explain, the only thing that puts those in a context that I can even get my brain around is that there is a God who's a creator who has a plan that's bigger that I just don't understand. So if I can bring that into my family life and I can bring that into, uh,
Mm,
the thousands of other difficult to understand situations that I'll find myself in after the military, if I can rest in that fact that the same God who was God when I was in Iraq and the same God who was God when things happened I could not understand, but gave peace in spite of that. The same God who I've had confidence in and trusted when so many things were hard for me to trust him through. If I can learn that and understand that, and I'll struggle and have to come back to it. But yeah, I mean, it changes everything. I mean, it changes everything.
yeah.
It puts the rest of the world into focus. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of the world is trying to get. They're trying to get, they say control, but they want focus. They want to know why. And as Christians, we have the ability to rest in that uncomfortable place where we can say, I don't know why, but I trust God. And by faith, I believe that He is in control and He has a plan. And I'm going to continue to do what He's called me to do and move toward that thing that He's set in front of me and trust Him to be God because I'm not God. And I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question or not, but I mean, for me, I think, what was the biggest takeaway? It was probably that. It was probably just going, wow,
Yeah.
stuff is really hard sometimes and I don't get it.
Mhm.
I'm just going to trust God and
Yeah.
keep my head down and keep moving forward.
I think that is the most important. I mean, I think that's the most important things for Christians and non Christians to realize. And I think that we do a little bit of we do a disservice to people as well as to God if we say, you know what, God's not really sovereign. He is the watchmaker, but he just set this thing running, and you have a lot of control and you have a lot of agency. And that feels like a compassionate thing to say to people at first because people want control and they want agency. But it's not very loving to put them in that situation to be like, oh yeah, you're in this situation, stuff's absolutely out of control, things are just incomprehensibly complicated right now, and we got mortar fire incoming,
Yeah.
but God's not really in control, you know.
Yeah. He's got his arms crossed,
uh,
right? He's just watching and
he's just
yeah,
watching. Yeah, it's
yeah,
it's.
yeah.
I think that so weakens the it so weakens the Christian message to pull God's sovereignty out of it, even though it supposedly is more ingratiating to the individual. I
Mhm.
think it's very counterproductive that way.
Well, we have a responsibility, the Bible's clear about that, but,
Mm,
that's different than us believing that we're God, and I don't know
yeah,
what again, I don't know that I would have said it exactly like that when I first had those thoughts. I can picture right now me standing on that road and having that thought, but that's what it is we've gotta get to the point where we realize, like, "You know what? I'm not God." And
right.
and I have some responsibilities, um,
Yes.
I'm accountable to God, but I'm not God, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that is incredibly important. And I think that needs to be an incredibly important part of the gospel message at its very heart. But then also my role as a dad, my role
Yeah.
doing whatever it is that I actually do at T.REX, to have that to have
Yeah.
that humility, I think is really key. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate that testimony and yeah, thank you so much for all of that,
No,
and
thank you, man.
for being on the podcast. This has been a tremendous conversation. I have like three different ways that I want to take another conversation and really drill down into some of these things.
Yeah, let's do it.
But is there anything that you specifically want to say to T.REX folks? Anything upcoming? You have two books, and you have events. Is there anything in particular you'd want to mention?
Yeah, I think the only thing is I would just point people to our website, particularly those who are in the veteran, military, first responder community, mightyoaksprograms.org. Our programs don't cost anything, they're free of charge. We also cover the cost of travel to get to the program. We just want to offer help. And again, I mentioned it's all from a faith position. a testimonial position. You'll be in a place where you're comfortable because you're around people like you, and we just want to offer that help. So no, I think that's it, man. I really appreciate just the opportunity to talk about it. These are
Oh yeah,
super important things.
yeah. Well, so on this podcast, I usually talk to friends of mine. This is one of the probably more self-indulgent podcasts out there, which is sounds terrible to say because that's what podcasting is in a nutshell. But we have a lot of mutual friends, so I'm glad that
Yeah.
we finally
Yep.
got a chance to chat. And yeah, keep up the good work. And I have some more ideas of stuff we want to talk about
Let's do it. Yeah,
that
let's
I
do it,
think will
man.
be interesting.
Beautiful.
Very
Yeah, let's
good.
do it.